Welcome back, everybody, to another video in our Web Development Foundation series. We've been going through CSS for the past quite a few videos, actually, and in this video, we're going to look at the CSS grid system. So if you look here at the screen, basically when I say grid, I mean something like this, where you can lay out items in a grid format, just like this. Now, obviously, you can, if you play around with this, do all of this as well with just a whole bunch of flex boxes. But I'm going to show you how to do it using the CSS grid, which is a pretty handy way of writing code. So let's just jump right into that. I've got right here, I've got a empty folder with, well, a folder with two empty files, rather, index.html and then style.css. So go ahead and generate the boilerplate code here. And we're going to rename this to CSS Grids. And then down here inside of our body, I'm going to have one div that we're going to call box. And this box, I'm going to give an ID. And this ID is just going to be, we'll call it section 1. And then inside of this div, let's put an H1 and we can say grid box. And then after that, down here, I'm going to put a div. And this div is going to be, I'm going to name it grid box. This is going to be essentially our div that holds a big grid on our screen. So now if I expand this open, in here, just like on the right side of my screen, I have 25 different boxes in here. I'm going to want to make 25 different boxes inside of this grid box div as well. And I could come through here and say div dot, and then I could say, grid item 1, and then copy that line and change it 25 times. But there's a much better way to do that. So if I just say div dot grid item, and then now instead of putting a number, if I put my squiggly braces and then a $sign in there, and then asterisk 25, and hit enter. Well, now this has given me all of my grid items. In fact, it's given me 25 grid items with 25 numbers inside of them. So if I save that, here you go. You've got a grid box, and then you've got numbers 1 through 25. Now let's go ahead and link our CSS file. So link CSS, and again, we're using this default name. So save that and then go into that file. And in this file, we can go ahead and start styling some of our grid items. So grid item, and in here, we're going to say display, flex. I'm going to say justify my content in the center. We're also going to say align items in the center, and that'll put it right in the middle of every box. And then after that, let's go ahead and give everything a border. We'll say 2 pixels, solid black. And then after that, I can say, let's give these a background color as well. Maybe Alice blue for that. Save that, and there you go. We've got all of our different divs that you can see now, 1 all the way through 25 with that border. But we're going to want to clean these up just a little bit. So we'll add a little bit of padding, maybe 8 pixels to each of them just to space things out a little bit more. And now I'm going to add, let's see, I'm going to add font size, and our font size, we'll set it to 2 rem. And actually, instead of doing 8 pixels of padding, let's come down here and only do padding on the left and the right, not the top and the bottom. So to do that, I can say padding 0 rem and then 2 rem. Now if I save that, it should be good. And actually, you won't see this padding really because we have all of our numbers in the center right now. And this is going to be what we want our grid items to look like. But these grid items are actually contained within this grid box class. So let's go ahead and style our grid box class as well. So grid box, and then inside of here, if I just set my display to grid and then save that, you'll see nothing's happened. Our display has changed, but it looks the same because we haven't defined what kind of grid we want. How many columns do we want? How many rows do we want? that kind of thing. So we have to go ahead and do that now. And to do that, if I just come in here and I say grid template columns, for example, and in here, if I just say auto and save it, basically what this means is I'm going to make one column here, and I'm going to automatically set it as wide as it can be. If I were to change this to auto, well, now you see I have two columns here, and both of them automatically take an even amount of space, as much space as they can, while sharing it with the other items as well. So I can come in here and say auto as many times as I want, and you see now I actually have 4 columns here. I can also adjust how big my rows are using the same command, grid template rows. And if I come in here and if I say maybe 300 pixels, 200 pixels, and then save that, you'll see now the first row is 300 pixels and the second row is 500 pixels, and then the rest of them are just what they were before. And I can do that same thing on the column as well. Actually, if I don't use auto, for example here, if I said 200 pixels and then save that, now you see column 1 and then 3 and 4 are all even, and then 2 is a little bit bigger, and that's because it's 200 pixels. If I make that maybe 400 pixels and save, now you can really see 1, 3, and 4 are the same, and then column 2 is much bigger, but we don't need to do that right now. So I'm going to set that back to auto. And then again, auto just kind of shares the room between all of them. And now every column has an equal amount of space. And down here, if we wanted to space things out just a little bit more, we could come down here and we can say grid gap. And there's different ways that you can do this. You can say grid row gap. And if I say maybe 20 pixels and then grid column gap, grid column gap, and maybe 10 pixels. Now if I save that, you can see between every column, meaning the vertical columns, between each column I have 10 pixels of gap, and then between every row I have 20 pixels of gap. Or if you want to do, instead of doing that in 2 separate lines, you can come down here and say grid gap, and instead of setting them individually, you can just say 20 pixels, 10 pixels, and then save that. And now you see that does the same thing. Or if you want these all to be the same, I could just do grid gap 10 pixels and save that. And there you go. Now you see we have 10 pixels in between everything on there. The next thing I'll show you is if we want one of these boxes, say maybe number 9, to span more than one row or more than one column, we can do that as well so that our grid doesn't contain all items that are exactly the same size. So come over to index and let's create a way to separate one of these. So in here, we're just going to say grid item 9. Now I'm going to copy that class name and come back on over to my styles. Now we've pasted our grid item 9. So inside of here, basically if I want to make number 9 span more than one column, what I need to do is I could say grid column, and basically this is going to say what column are we starting in, or rather what edge are we starting on and what edge are we going to. So if you look at this grid box here, right down here before the first column is going to be number 1 and then 2. So if I come in here and say 1/2 and save that, number 9 hasn't changed at all, because what this means is I want number 9 to span from the first line here, which is the start of my page, to the second line here, which is after the first column, and it already does that. But if I were to change that to 3, now it's going to span from here all the way to my third division line here. So now if I save that, you can see 9 is spanning 2 columns now. Same thing, if I wanted it to span 2 rows, I could say grid row, and then here, 1 again, instead of doing, if I do 1-2, and then save that. Now you see 9 jumps to the top because again, 1 is going to be this top line, and then 2 is going to be the second one down. So it's out of order now. If I wanted to push it back down where it was, you have to count. So we go 1, 2, 3. So we would start at 3. And then, so here's 3, here's 4, and then here's 5. So let's say we want it to go down to 5. And now if I save that, you can see I've got box 9 now spanning two columns as well as 2 rows. So I can do that with anything in there that I want to, just to kind of rearrange your grid and resize things, make things a little more interesting in there. Okay, let's give our grid box a little more styling here. So we'll add a border to that, 2 pixels, solid black, and then we'll give this one a background color as well. And this background color, I don't care, blue. Okay, so there we go. We've got our grid box. Let's add a tiny bit of padding to that as well. Padding, maybe 10 pixels. There we go. That's a nice grid there. Now, what if we wanted to put this grid inside of a much larger page? So if you look like on a modern web page, typically you'll have like your header and then your footer and then a whole bunch of information in between. Sometimes you'll have like a sidebar in there. So let's go ahead and come back to our index.html and let's make some of these things as well. So I'm going to say header dot, and this one I'm just going to give it an ID of header. Then same thing down here for a footer. Footer with a class name, rather, a class name of footer. Let's actually do that as an ID. So header ID and then class name ID. And up here we've got section 1. So let's say under section 1, I want another section. And in here, I can say div.section2. And then actually, again, let's do all of these as IDs and not just classes. And then after that, we're going to say we're going to have an aside. And this aside is going to have, we'll just give it an ID of aside. So there we go. We've got all of our sections, but we want to put all of these now inside of a grid. So to do that, I'm actually going to wrap all of this text here inside of a grid. Or inside of a container. So we're going to cut that out, and then I'm going to say div.container, and then inside of that, I'm going to paste everything that I have. So now that I have that, if I save this, and actually let's go ahead and give this box class to a few more things. So in here, we're going to use multi-cursor selection. We'll do it there, just holding the Alt key on all of these, and I'm going to say class equals box. Okay, now come back into style.css. In here, I could say dot box, and then inside of our box, just so we can see them all, we need a border, 2 pixels, solid black, and then we're going to do let's do a margin. Actually, let's just do padding, 10 pixels. Save that. Okay, and now you can see here's all of our different sections, but we have them in the right order, but we haven't put anything in there. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of our header, typically in a header, you'll have something like home, about, contact, blog, I don't know, something like that. And then down here inside of section 2, we'll just give it some random text, so lorem 30. And then inside of the aside, we'll say lorem 50, give that some random text too. And then in the footer, we will just simply say copyright 2024. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and save that. And you'll notice we've given footer with an ID of footer, aside, div, ID of section 2. And then up here, we have our container class. So the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and style some of our sections here. So I could say dot section 2, and then in here, basically we'll give it a background color, and I don't really care. Let's pick a light color, light coral, save. And why did that not work? Oh, this is a ID, not a class, so make sure to use your ID selector. Save that, and there's our section 2. Let's do the same for our aside. And then in here, background color, light, doesn't really matter, light gray. There's our add. And then down for the footer, we can say footer, background color, and in here, aqua, header, background color, light, goldenrod, why not? Okay, and for our grid box as well, we've done that. And then finally, we will do our, let's see, we've got everything set up. We need to actually style our container. So we've got all of these different divs and headers and footers inside of this container class, which is going to be our container for our grid layout for our entire page. So we need to set up that container. So to do that, let's go ahead and come in here and we can say dot container, and this container in here, I'm going to give this a background color as well. Background color, light slate gray, and then a display of grid. Okay, now that we have that, we can actually assign basically grid chunks of the grid area. We can assign to every individual HTML element that we have in here. So to do that, we can come up into here and we can say grid area. And then for the grid area, for this, I will just call it section 2. Down here for my aside, we can say grid area and then say add. And this will make sense why I'm doing this in a second. Down here, we can say grid area footer. My header is going to be grid area header. And then there's one more, my grid box up here. We need to find that. So let's see, what is that? My grid box is inside of section 1. Okay, I don't think I've actually styled section 1 yet. Let's go ahead and do that now. Section 1, we'll give that a background color of aquamarine. And then down here, we can say grid area main. Okay, so now you'll notice if you save that, everything's gone and the only thing you see is your footer. And basically what that means is we need to actually define where each one of these grid areas sits within our larger grid. So to do that, we need to come down to our container, and in here there's a attribute called grid template areas. So here, if I just do within single quotes, if I say header, 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 and then after that, we are going to say, again, within single quotes, we're going to say main, 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 add. And then after that, we're going to say section 2, section 2, section 2, add. And then finally, in the last quotes, if I say footer, 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 and save that, well, now you see our entire website is laid out quite nicely. You've got our header. So basically every one of these, think of each one of these blocks in quotes like a row. So this top one here, this is going to be essentially, we're separating it into 4 different columns down the table or down the page. And this header is going to go across all 4 of them. So if I were to like take maybe this last one and change that to add, which is our aside block up here, save that. Now you can see the add extends all the way to the top. Or if I were to take this footer and change that last one to add as well, now that add is going to extend all the way to the bottom. So basically, what this does, think of this like a row. So there's 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, and everything we have lined out here is just essentially how things are going to be laid out on the actual page down below. So let me see if I can space this out to make it look just a little bit more understandable for you. Essentially, this would actually make more sense in like Microsoft Excel or something like that. But think of it like this, where you've got essentially this grid template areas. What we're doing is we're defining our template by using these grid area labels that we've defined, that we've given to each section that we have. And again, if I wanted to make this look just a little bit more interesting, I can come in here again and say grid gap, and then maybe 10 pixels, space things out just a little bit more. And that's pretty much how we build grids. And this can be very useful. Obviously, if you play around with it enough, you can get this entire layout put down on your web page using flex boxes and other display methods that we have. But this is sometimes a much quicker and a much easier and a much more simple way of defining your layout so that you can quickly nest grids inside of other grids like we have here, and then assign or lay out your entire page as a grid. So hopefully you've been able to follow this video. If not, you can definitely pause or go back and check out the parts that were confusing one more time. I'll put some reading down in the description of this video too to further clarify and further explain how grids work. And anyway, if you don't have any other questions, then we will see you in the next video, where I think finally we're going to get out of CSS and start doing something a little more interesting and a little more challenging called JavaScript.